Okay. Good evening, everybody. Now, please can I welcome everyone to the meeting of the Licensing and Regulation Committee taking place from the Wharton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is exactly 6:30. My name is Councillor Roger Bentote, Chairperson of the committee. Please can I advise people that the meeting is being audio recorded and live streamed from the Council's website. In addition, a video recording of the meeting will be uploaded to the Council's YouTube channel after the meeting. Please can I remind any officers or councillors joining virtually to turn off their cameras and mute their microphones until invited to speak. And please can I remind members here to speak clearly and remember to use your microphone. Finally, can I ask everyone to ensure that mobile phones and other electronic devices are on silent or switched off entirely?
Yeah.
I think before we start this evening,
I think better say something.
yes. Thank you, David. It's very sad news, of course, the death of our fellow councillor, Linda Murphy, earlier this week. It's very sad news that after she had made some recovery, and unfortunately, Monday night she was taken very, very ill and died later that evening. So I think it's only right that we should have 1 minute silence to remember our colleague, please. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll start the evening with apologies. Any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. No apologies received. Thank you.
Very much. Any disclosures of interest? None. Right, we need to appoint a vice chair. Can I have any nominations for vice chair, please?
Yes, I'd like to nominate Councillor Green.
Councillor Green, anybody second that, please? Thank you, Councillor Williams.
I will second that.
Any other nominations? I declare Councillor Green elected vice chair. I should stay there for you. Thank you. Right, we move on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Are we all agreed to the minutes of the previous meeting? Agree. Very much. We have no public participation tonight, so we can go straight into the three items that are up for this evening's work. We have three policy type things to look at. First one on the gambling, second one on pavement licensing, and the last one just an update about where we are with taxes, which we've been looking at in recent meetings. So we'll move straight on to the Gambling Act, and I'll ask Brian if she could introduce the item, please.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies I'm not sat with all of you. I would hate for any of you to catch the cold that I have at the moment. So looking at agenda item 6, which is page 7 in your report bundle, and this is a report relating to the review of Statement of Principles under the Gambling Act 2005. Councillors, the licensing authority is required to review and publish its Statement of Principles every 3 years. The current statement is in effect until the 31st of January 2022, so we are due for a review. The Gambling Commission publishes guidance to licensing authorities on its website, and the last update was in April 2021, so it's a timely review for us. The proposed changes to the statement largely reflect the changes made in the recent changes in the guidance. The proposed amendments in the statement can be broadly split into 4 sections, and that is actions for the licensing authority, actions for gambling operators, clarification on application procedures and premises operation, and updates to language and terminology. The draft statement can be seen at Appendix 1 to the report, and that's pages 19 to 73 of your report bundle. All proposed changes are shown tracked. I appreciate that's not the easiest way to read things, but it is the easiest way for us to show the changes that are proposed. The proposed changes to the statement underwent a public consultation between the 21st of September and 21st of October 2021. The consultees included the Chief Constable of Hampshire Constabulary, persons who represented the interests of people carrying on gambling businesses, and persons who represented the interests of people who are likely to be affected by gambling activities. 3 responses were received to the consultation, 1 in favour of the proposed changes and the other 2 being neutral with no comments. The responses can be seen in Appendix 2 to your report, which is pages 75 to 77. It is our recommendation that the statement, including any proposed changes, is recommended for full adoption by full council at the next available hearing. And I welcome any questions you might have about the proposals. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Brian. Right, there's a lot of paperwork to go through. Do we have any questions? No questions. I think it's a very good piece of work that Briley and her team have done. They have all the explanations early on in the report there about why certain things have been changed. Most of them are fairly obvious to come into line with the current legislation, so I think we are quite happy with that. Do we have any debate on this one?
Sorry, Jim, my fault.
Yeah.
I have a couple of queries, shall we say. On page 9, part A, 3.7 says contacting the licensing department at the address below, but the address below has been lined out. Page 9, part A.
In the
Thank you, Councillor. I can
Okay.
put that through as a
Do you want me to
recommendation.
carry on, Gina? Because I've got a few more.
Yes.
Okay, on page 12, part A, there are some what appear to be inconsistencies. In the majority of cases, the word Winchester City has been deleted and the word the council has replaced it. But as you see on 6.6, it refers to Winchester City Council and not the council, as in many other places. And if you go through it, you'll see several instances on the same page where it's gone back to the full title. Okay. On page 14, unless someone can reply to that. Sorry, carry on.
Yes.
On page 14, 6.18, the comma has been inadvertently missed out in the address. It's Winchester City Council, and then it should be comma, City Council offices, comma, Colbrook Street, comma. And on page 25, I'm just trying to find it. Yeah, on page 25, 9.8, again, the word council, which the city been put in there again. Page 39, This might have, I might actually have got the answer to this one, but just to clarify, where the line child and the description, I'm assuming that has been replaced by young person. Would that be correct? Later on.
So councillor, the reason that child has been removed from our glossary and also from the Gambling Commission's own glossary is because throughout the Gambling Act 2005, the definition of child is sometimes someone under the age of 16, sometimes someone under the age of 17, and sometimes under the age of 18. And so for consistency, we've removed that.
So it is being replaced by a young person.
Correct.
Thank you. And the other one is a typographics, is the spacing on page 47, part A. It seems to jump around a bit, the spacing. That you'll be glad to hear, Chairman, was the last of mine.
Well, thank you.
I only actually read, with all honesty, the proposed corrections. So I haven't read the whole text.
Thank you very much anyway. I'm sure those could be corrected accordingly. Anybody else spot anything else? Thank you, Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, I was just going to ask a question. Obviously, there was a discrepancy there between the council and Winchester City Council. What's the purpose for removing the word Winchester?
So our corporate communications team are trying to introduce ourselves as Winchester City Council in the first instance that it's written, and then every reference thereafter should be the council. It's consistent with the corporate style. Thank you.
Thank you. What else? Right. So, any debate? We could ask questions. Any debate on this? I think it's something we need, obviously, and need to just to approve. So, I think we have to recommend that this goes to the next meeting of council, to a meeting of council to be fully approved at a full council meeting. Have we all agreed on that?
I agree.
Agree.
Thank you very much. Right, then we're to the next, which is the review of pavement licensing policy. This is the policy which came in during COVID, restrictions, allow expansion of businesses onto the pavement. It was only to be for a year, and that has now been extended. Friday, I think, was fully just inform us again. Thank you.
You're after my job, Chair. So agenda item 7 here is the review of our pavement licensing policy, which is quite straightforward. The council as the licensing authority is responsible for administrating applications for pavement licenses under the Business and Planning Act 2020. The Act was introduced during the height of the coronavirus pandemic to provide hospitality businesses with an affordable and expedited process for licensing furniture placed on the highway. In most cases, that is pavements, but occasionally it also closed roads. The Act specified a 7-day consultation period, a further 7-day determination period, and a maximum application fee of £100. The provisions under the Act were due to expire on the 30th of September 2021. Since then, it has been extended until the 30th of September 2022 by the Secretary of State. The Council published its pavement licensing policy in late 2020. The proposed changes are to amend the dates for which the policy is in effect as per the amended legislation, and to clarify the process for businesses whose licences expired on the 30th of September 2021. The draft policy can be seen at Appendix 1, which is pages 95 to 107. All the proposed changes are shown tracked. No public consultation was required or undertaken for this policy review, and the recommendation is that the minor amendments to the policy are agreed by the Licensing and Regulation Committee. There is no need for adoption by the Council.
Thank you very much, Barney. Any questions? Councillor Clay?
Thank you, Chair. Without naming a business, we have a business in Bishop's Waltham that has a licence. We've got 3 or 4 of them actually, very similar. And the tables and chairs they have spread out into the pavement, blockable. So people can only walk past their tables one abreast. people with pushchairs struggle to get by. So how do we go about enforcing the licence that we give so people operate their businesses within the rules of the licence? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. So I don't actually have any pavement licences in Bishop's Waltham, but I do have tables and chairs permits,
Yes.
which are the previous type of permit which still exists. The Highways Authority recommends a minimum of 1.8 metres maintained clear for the safe passage of pedestrians, pushchairs and wheelchairs. Upon receipt of any complaints, we do investigate all of those complaints. I haven't had any complaints about any businesses in Bishop's Waltham, but would be happy to speak to you after the meeting about your concerns. We would issue a remediation notice to that business, giving them 7 days to rectify the issue. After that 7-day period, if the issue has not been rectified, then the council can take enforcement action, such as revoking the permit, suspending the permit, or actually sending our special maintenance team out there to rectify the problems themselves, which can involve confiscating the furniture.
Right, thank you. I'll talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Do we need any debate? Can we all agree then that with these minor amendments that we are very happy with this pavement policy? Yeah. Takes us on to item 8. It's just a verbal update. There's no particular for us to agree on or anything, but Brian is going to update us about the taxi policy.
Thank you, Chair. So I've handed this out as a paper version. It will be published on the website after this meeting. Does everybody have a copy of the members' briefing? Seems so. So the council last reviewed its taxi policy. I'll call it for short because the actual name of it is quite lengthy. We last reviewed the taxi policy in 2020 with amendments made to vehicle age, emissions standards and vehicle signage. Since this review, the Department for Transport has published its statutory taxi and private hire standards. That was published in July 2020. And these standards focus on establishing common core minimum standards across the taxi and private hire sector. And the main aim is to protect children and vulnerable adults. So the Department for Transport expects us to implement these standards unless we have compelling reasons not to do so. And we must demonstrate that there are compelling reasons not to do so if we choose not to implement any of these standards. We're just in the process of finalising a document which breaks down every single recommendation in those standards and our consideration of them. You'll be pleased to know that the majority of these standards we actually already have in our policy. We have a very robust policy compared to some other licensing authorities in the UK. So the policy review will be almost entirely based on those statutory standards published by the Department of Transport. Now what I've done in your handout is just broken that down into how that will affect hackney carriage and private hire drivers, hackney carriage and private hire vehicles, private hire operators, and then general amendments that will affect how the licensing authority acts under the relevant legislation and how it makes decisions. So broadly speaking, it would involve mandating 6 monthly DBS checks for hackney carriage and private hire drivers. At the moment, they're subject to an enhanced DBS check every 3 years. We're looking to outsource those 6 monthly DBS checks to our current approved provider for DBS checks. And they will provide us with a list every 2 weeks of the status of our drivers' DBS checks. If anything has changed on their record, they'd be required to get a new certificate. It's quite a robust procedure that we're looking at. We'd also be looking at requiring an applicant to submit a certificate of good character from a country outside of the UK where they've spent more than 3 months. Initially, we do currently require a certificate of good character, but only where someone has lived outside of the UK for more than 10 years. So actually we're looking at someone who's lived out of the UK for 3 months instead. We'll be looking to require licence holders to disclose arrests, charges, convictions, cautions, fixed penalty notices or community resolutions within 48 hours. Under our current policy, that is 7 days. And then we'll also be looking to ask applicants and current licence holders to disclose if they have ever had a licence suspended by any other licensing authority. At the moment, we only ask if an application has been refused or a licence revoked. For Hackney carriage and private hire vehicles, as I said, we did review our policy on that in 2020. There aren't a huge amount of changes to make here. Primarily, it is to mandate a basic DBS check for vehicle proprietors. So that is someone who holds a vehicle licence but might not necessarily be a driver. We do have a few companies, for example, that license Hackney carriage and private hire vehicles and then lease them out to drivers. In that circumstance, we looked at a basic DBS check from every director or partner of that company. We're also looking to mandate the display of information in all licensed vehicles. That will include the vehicle licence number and contact details for the licensing authority so that people know where to make a complaint or provide feedback on their journey, the standard of driving, the vehicle that they've been transported in. And I've been working closely with our comms team to put in a QR code so that somebody can scan that quite easily with a smartphone, and that takes you direct to our feedback form on our website. For private hire operators, we're looking for a basic DBS check every year. At the moment, that is only required every 3 years. And similarly for any directors or partners where the operator licence is held by a company. And then we're also looking to introduce requirements for, for operators to keep a register of all staff, to obtain basic DBS checks for all of their staff, and also provide a policy on employing ex-offenders. And then in relation to the licensing authority's actions and decisions, we're looking at making referrals to the DBS where a Hackney carriage or private hire driver's licence has been revoked or an application refused. And there's guidance provided on when that would be appropriate to do so. We're looking at a requirement for the council to refer cases to the police where a Hackney carriage or private hire driver's licence has been revoked, if it has been done so on public safety grounds, and again there is guidance published on that. And we're also looking to utilise the National Anti-Fraud Network, or NR3 as it's called, and that would include information on drivers who might have had their licence revoked, suspended or refused by another local authority, so that will help us to form decisions as well. We're looking to commit to review the statement of licensing policy at least every 5 years. At the moment, it has sort of been on a sort of need to basis, but the Department of Transport suggests that we give it every 5 years to ensure that it is current. So that's, broadly speaking, the changes that we're looking at. Naturally, this committee will be presented with a full report once the changes, the proposed changes are finalised. And we will be looking to put the changes into a public consultation period of 4 to 6 weeks.
Very much.
Any questions?
Thank you, Councillor Williams.
Yes, one of my questions was about the DBS going from 3 years for Hackney carriage to every 6 months. Who's going to bear the cost of that additional DBS checks? Because that will be substantial, I would imagine.
So for clarity, we will be mandating that all of our drivers sign up to DBS update service. They sign up to that service, it costs them £13 per year, which is yet less than it would cost to have a DBS check every 3 years. If no information changes on their DBS check, so no new convictions are disclosed, for example, then the driver would never have to fill in an application for a DBS check ever again. So it is actually a cost saving for the drivers.
Thank you.
Councillor McLean.
Thank you. With the information that's being displayed inside the vehicle, will there be a photograph of the driver that's got the information attached to it within the vehicle, so that the passenger can say, it says it's John Smith, but it's not, it's somebody else. And the second question, if I can't see the look of it, I'll just skim through it. We did have some instances, probably about 2 years ago now, where some of the disabled friendly vehicles were not taking people with help dogs. I remember that coming before this committee probably a couple of years ago now. Is there anything in here that protects a disabled, someone, I'm with Canine Partners, but there's also guide dogs. Is there anything in here that protects the customer? Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. So in response to your first question, with regards to displaying a photograph of the driver in the vehicle, a lot of our vehicles are driven by multiple drivers. You will find that where a family has one or two brothers who are all private hire drivers, for example, they actually all share the same vehicle, some working during the day, some working during the evening, and some working at the weekend. That's a cost saving thing that we've seen actually increasing over the past few years. All of our licensed drivers have to wear a licence badge, which includes their full name, the expiry date of their licence and their photograph, and that must be clearly available to the customer to see and presented on request. Some of our drivers do actually display it on the mirror or on the partition because they feel that that is clearer, but the complaint information that we're looking to display would be relevant to that vehicle.
Okay, I think, is it not reasonable that that should be mandated, that there is a photograph of the driver just put on the back of the headrest, so that the two can be linked? Because if not, you don't know who the driver is.
So we are fortunate that we do keep a record of everybody who is insured to drive each vehicle. So if somebody, for example, provided me with a Hackney Carriage vehicle licence number or a registration number, I could use our database to find exactly who does drive that vehicle. I would need to look into the data protection implications of us displaying photographs of every driver that drives one vehicle. As I say, it might be more than one driver for one vehicle. But I can certainly seek advice on that.
Right, I think I would very much like to, because I think, and the Americans do it, every driver has a photograph of the vehicle, which allows the customer to identify who was driving the vehicle if they were in a shenanigans. Not saying they will, but it has been done.
Thank you, councillor. I'll look into that with our data protection officer.
Then a second.
Yes, of course. So in relation to the taking of assistance dogs in licensed vehicles, that is mandated under the Equality Act 2010. This policy doesn't seek to duplicate any legislation. However, there is, of course, I don't have a copy of the policy here, but there is reference to the carriage of assistance dogs and wheelchairs. Penalty points can be applied to a driver's licence for refusing to do so. We do investigate those complaints very seriously and thoroughly. In fact, I've investigated 3 to 4 complaints of that nature in the last 12 months and have issued penalty points and sent drivers on disability awareness courses to increase their knowledge.
Is it the same driver each time?
No.
Councillor Williams?
Yeah, and Catherine can go first.
Councillor Green,
Sorry, Councillor Wood. Yes, Chairman, just touching on what Councillor McLean has just said, if it was part of the licence that is shown, then a photograph is automatic these days with ID badges, which shows all the information on it, and it would have a photograph. So I can't see any real problem, but that's something we're looking to. With regard to the DBS once a year, if somebody blocks their copybook, so to speak, within that year, what is the situation with, do they continue to the end of the year? How do we know as an authority that there has been a case brought against and convictions being given?
Thank you, councillor. So our policy and our conditions already stipulate that drivers or operators or vehicle proprietors must disclose any caution, conviction, arrest, community resolution or fixed penalty notice within 7 days. Failure to do so would be a breach of condition and therefore a breach of their licence. We're looking to reduce that timescale to 48 hours, which we think is more appropriate and is in line with the Department for Transport's recommendations. We also have an information sharing agreement in place with all of the licensing authorities in Hampshire and with the local police, and we're regularly passed information, particularly from our colleagues in the police, under common law police disclosure powers.
Thank you. Finally, Chair, if I may, some years ago, maybe 3 years ago, we've always had problems with outside operators, licenses issued by other authorities operating within Winchester. So I'm told it's all granted. But Birmingham came to mind, so it's not too far. But how do we get on in a situation? Presumably this situation can still exist. How can it be controlled, or can't it?
The short answer is at the moment, the legislation does not allow us to control that any more than we already do. I was actually at a national training conference very recently with the Institute of Licensing where this question was raised with representatives from the Department of Transport, and they themselves admitted that our legislation that governs private hire vehicles is rather outdated. Cross-border hiring is permitted under the relevant legislation. It is a frustration to licensing authorities and licensed drivers alike. It's something that we continue to lobby the government to improve. However, it can still continue.
So the answer is, as members, we should be contacting our members of Parliament and try to adjust this particular anomaly. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wheeler, it's one question.
Slightly a little bit just out of interest as much as anything. On the Hackney carriage and private hire drives, it says requires an applicant to submit a certificate of good character where they have spent an extended period, 6 months or more, or continuous months outside the UK. I'm assuming, is that everybody? And so if I was a taxi driver and I went away for 6 months and I would have to prove my good character. Seems a little extreme.
So the certificate of good character, I also don't like the term, I'm afraid, is essentially the same as a DBS check from another country. And so DBS checks that we undertake here in the UK can't take account of foreign offences. And so a certificate of good character is provided by the home country, normally by the police department, and is a disclosure of any convictions that may have occurred during that driver or licence holder's period in another country.
So just, yeah, that's just sort of, so it's a home country, so it's not the UK citizens who then left the UK for 6 months.
So if somebody did leave the UK for six months, then we would still require one, and that is that's a recommendation from the Department for Transport, just in case anyone was to commit offences overseas for public safety reasons.
Any further questions on this?
Sorry,
Yeah. Sorry.
I was actually following on from Councillor Reid as well, and McLean has been talking about the cross-border, and that actually maybe it's something that we as council should write to our MPs. If it's something as a committee that we felt strongly about, would it be something that we as a committee would want to put a letter to our local MP? I don't know. I mean, that may be completely off the line, but it feels to me that actually if it's an issue for Winchester and one that we haven't been able to write, we need to let our MP know how we as the committee feel, and actually that would be stronger than each one of us as individuals. So
I think, yeah, if we could, I think we could write it under your name, or your position, and send it to the board.
I mean, everybody happy with that? Anybody want to make a comment before we agree it?
Great, yeah.
Yeah, very
I think you've got to remember, Chair, that Winchester's split into 2 constituencies, so it would be both our MPs.
We could sort something out on that. Fine, that'd be great. Anything further? Right, well that concludes the meeting. I think that I'd like to thank Brian for a very clear exposition on this taxi business and all her work that she's done on all the policies that we've had before us this evening. So thank you very much, Brian. Very good, thank you. And thank everybody else for coming. I close this meeting at 7:05.